my name's Chris. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means is I get to be an active member of the recovery community today. It means that I'm a father. It means I have a career back, that I have a family, and I have very close friends. I got involved with YPR back in August of 2017, and it became part of my recovery because I felt that the position that YPR took on advocating towards people that are still active in their addiction or that have found their way into recovery, there was important topics to be discussed. And so very excited to be a part of this video series here. And today we get to do an interview here with Evan Doan. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you did.
I did.
Yep.
Yep.
Good job.
Learned that Saturday. With Evan Doan here, who's actually a member of USAR. I'm going to let him do a quick introduction on himself and have a quick conversation about recovery support, what that looks like in our community, what it can look like in yours, and also we'll talk about some areas where you may need some improvements. So Evan, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you're with and what you do here.
So my name's Evan Doan. I'm a person in long-term recovery as well, and what that means for me today is that I get to serve as the Community Outreach and Empowerment Coordinator for the Utah Support Advocates for Recovery Awareness, USARA. USARA is Utah's statewide recovery community organization. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides a number of recovery support services, including peer recovery coaching across the state of Utah. And I'm really happy to be here today.
Perfect, thanks.
Cool.
So in the topic of recovery support, Evan, let's talk first about, a lot of people will probably find this video from other chapters in YPR across the nation.
Sure.
As you're aware, there's not really the luxury of having USAR everywhere, right?
Right.
Which is kind of great because it's a place where everyone can, get together. We have lots of different modalities of recovery available, right? We have peer support, recovery coaching. And I think for me, what I see is it's a really good place, to be on the ground floor of what's happening in our community and the progress or sometimes lack of progress we're making, right?
Sure.
So what do you see that works, within USARA, within our local recovery community? What works for recovery support? What do you think people need?
Yeah.
Specifically, for me, I see the big gap. People go to treatment, they have everything they need there, right? They've got food, shelter, counselors. But real recovery starts when you get out of that, right? When you stop the cycle. So what do you see that works for people?
So I think that you kind of hit the nail right on the head when you said that we're really lucky in Utah to have a recovery community organization like ours, because not all states have that.
Yeah.
And we are an organization that supports people in whatever pathway of recovery they find meaningful and purposeful to them. And so, for some people that might look like something like 12-step or a refuge recovery or life ring or a fitness-based group. And we don't really have any investment in what that looks like for another person. We want to make sure that people are finding a pathway of recovery that resonates for them.
Yeah.
And luckily, especially in Salt Lake County, we have a number of different recovery pathways represented. And so people really do have a lot of options these days. Whereas maybe only just a few years ago, they could only access 12-step groups, and now there are a variety of different kinds of recovery support groups available, mutual aid groups available that were not accessible to people, even a decade ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the strengths that our community certainly has, is that we have an organization like USARA that helps people find a pathway of recovery that's going to work for them. But also, as you alluded to, I think that one of the deficits we see in the system is that oftentimes we treat substance use disorders with acute periods of care. So we put someone in treatment for a very short duration of time, and it's kind of like, okay, good luck, you're fixed. Bye, right? Yeah. But what we know about substance use disorders is that they are chronic but manageable brain conditions. And so really, people need something that's going to provide them support throughout the entirety of their life. It's continuing support beyond just that acute episode of care. And so I think that where our system kind of fails people is that we're set up with this acute system of care model when really we need to look at it, longitudinally across the course of someone's life. So how are we going to transition people from acute care into recovery supports that are going to last them for the rest of their life? And I think that's definitely an area where we could improve.
Yeah. Absolutely, no, I agree. So one question comes to mind is if you could define recovery support, right? If we could just start from where we're at now, and add in whatever's needed, what would you like to see in more in recovery support?
I think that like people need to. What we know about recovery is that it's an individualized process. That everyone has their own program of recovery that works for them. Even people who share a similar kind of path
Right.
or attend similar mutual aid groups. The person sitting right next to in a recovery meeting might practice their recovery in an entirely different way than you do. And so, really, I think one of the things that we need to pay attention to is making sure that we're honoring that this is an individualized process, and that what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so we allow for that diversity, that people really to have quite a few options when it comes to how they're going to manage their substance use disorder over the long run.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. And where do you feel that as a local community we could do better? And you talked in regards to, that transition period, right, from treatment and looking at acute. Um, when it comes to resources,
Mm-hmm.
right, where do you think more resources should be directed to?
I think that we're starting to see, a growing movement of supporting medication-assisted treatment supports. But that's certainly an area where we have nationally and locally been deficient in the past.
Yeah.
That we've not allowed space for people who are, on certain kinds of medications to feel welcome in the rooms of recovery. So especially, 12-step groups get held up oftentimes as being, an abstinence-only based approach. But my experience with 12-step groups has been that that's not universally true. There's a lot of people in the 12-step community that would welcome someone who was on
Sure.
medication-assisted supports and would not treat that any differently. And I think that we're seeing that mindset change over time. So I think to pigeonhole 12-step or any other recovery path to say, well, they're abstinence only, they're not supportive of people in medication-assisted treatments or therapies is kind of it's a little bit of a I don't know, misnomer, or
Yeah.
it's not entirely accurate. But that being said, there are things that we can do as people in recovery in those rooms to change those settings to make them more accessible, more inclusive of people who are on medication-assisted supports. Because what we know is that for opiate use disorder, the gold standard really for a lot of folks is those kinds of medications, things like Suboxone or buprenorphine, or Vivitrol. And so those kinds of medications have been critical for some people to be able to establish and maintain recovery over an extended period of time. And so I think that we could be paying more attention to what are we doing to move the needle forward in terms of advancing the conversation in our recovery communities, but also in treatment settings, to make sure that people have access to those kinds of supports and treatment if necessary. Most recently, I think I read that something like only a quarter of treatment organizations in the United States allow medication-assisted treatment supports. Yeah. And that's dismally low when we know that is oftentimes the best way of helping someone achieve long-term sobriety and or long-term recovery. And so I know that we're seeing a lot of movement on that federally, with some of the grants that are being issued and things like that right now that are inclusive of those medication-assisted supports. And so there's I think a lot of movement that we're seeing that's supporting people in that environment, especially in acute treatment settings, to make sure that they're getting the care that they need. But we also need to respond as a community to make sure that we're being inclusive of those people as well.
Yeah. I definitely find in recovery, it's a human nature to judge, right?
Right.
But in recovery, it seems that we're pretty critical on what someone else's recovery looks like.
Right.
So
and we get oddly specific about what medications are and aren't okay. You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like, I mean, there are some people that would say that, you know, as I'm someone who benefits from an antidepressant medication, and there are people in recovery who would judge that and say that I'm not completely sober because I do take something that
Yeah,
affects my mood.
sure.
But at the same time, it's something for me that it's not pretty when I'm not on my
Yeah,
medications. You know, my life is not good, and so I have a really hard time maintaining recovery without those medications. And so I don't see why we should treat medications like buprenorphine or Vivitrol any differently than any other mental health medication. They should be just as broadly accepted, if not more so. So,
yeah, makes sense. Okay. And just closing question in wrapping up, if someone were to stumble across this video, one thing we want to help direct people at YPR as far as long-term recovery, whatever that means to them, of course, but I mean sustained recovery, right?
yeah.
What advice would you have for that person that's transitioning out of treatment and maybe uh, one program doesn't fit them perfectly? What would you recommend as far as resources? Where would they go to find, more ways to recover, more things to get themselves involved in?
Yeah. I think that, accessing groups like Young People in Recovery or recovery community organizations like USARA can be a critical gateway in terms of helping you figure out what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And because oftentimes it's people like us that are familiar with those different recovery pathways
Yeah.
and what options are available to people. And we can help people navigate that system. But I would also encourage everyone to try whatever is available to them locally, wherever they may be. Depending upon where you are in the country, there are different kinds of mutual aid groups in different settings. And so, give as many as a shot as you feel comfortable, because what may not work for you in one group might work for you in another one. And so, I think that really, like, allowing yourself to experience the diversity of kinds of recovery supports that are out there is really important.
Perfect. Good deal. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate you
Yeah.
taking the time to do the video.
Thanks, Chris.
All right.